Hi, I'm Terry Leverett, president of Prepare the Way. I'd like to introduce to you David Regnier of Armageddon Armory. He is an expert in arms, as he's going to teach on that, and he comes to it with a 30-year history of the Special Forces, and now with his armory gun store. Thank you.
I tell you that this is not a good strategy to defend your castle. You may have your stuff there, and you may sleep there, but you can't defend it. You can't be awake 24 hours a day. There's 4 sides, you're one person. How are you going to watch all 4 sides at once? By the time you're watching this direction, they could come in the backyard and already be in your house and you wouldn't even know it. You see what I'm talking about? It's better to have a coalition of at least a block or more if you're in an urban setting. And what I'm saying is you get with your neighbors and you can go out here and you can post a person, 4 people that can see each other and that are armed, can raise an alarm, they can raise a noise that you could perceive, and then force could be directed in the direction more than one person could be called to direct force against an incoming threat. So you can see that there's an economy of scale starting to happen here. The more people you have involved, the better the chance that you're going to be able to survive and protect your investments, protect your supplies, and keep order. If you're going to go ahead and hold a soup kitchen out here and try and feed people as they're passing by, that's fine, but you need to keep them from coming in to your area. You don't let them inside. You always do your distribution on the outside of your security zone. And so you've already decided this is going to be your secure area. You don't bring people in. Don't. It takes too much to control them. You always keep them out here. Always out here. So your point of contact is out here if you're going to feed people or minister to them. So here you're looking at, you might have 10, 12, 15, 20 people. You need to have enough. You need to think about this. You need to have enough people where you can have shifts to maintain these lookout points, these vantages. On top of this, handheld small powered radios are really nice. You can get them dirt cheap. You can get solar chargers for them and stuff. They work really effective in these short line of sight radius transmissions for communication. It can be a force multiplier. Now, this is going to be, I drew this just to say, think about the control and the direction of local access. You can't stop a major thoroughfare, but you can keep people on it and say, no, don't stop here, keep moving on. This is really important because you can't have them wandering in here, in among your houses or in among your things. What we've done where I live is that I have a block here. I have a block here, a block here, a block here that I have coalitions with. And this street here, I'm going to try and get a coalition going with these people soon. To where they know me. These are all very old, retired people around in this area. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to arm them and ask them to stand guard, and then we're going to cook at my house for everybody. And then we have a large street that kind of comes by like this through our neighborhood. And we're going to take our extra trailers, our extra cars, and we're going to block these streets. And that'll be our perimeter. And we'll block them with, we'll have tires, we'll have junk, we'll pile stuff up to where it's obvious there's something there. We're trying to keep people out. We're going to put signs up and say, move on, this neighborhood patrolled and protected. And we'll work together and we will try and keep out the roving groups. After this type of security is necessary for a varying lengths of time, depending upon the season of the year that things fall apart in. If it's early spring and things fall apart, you're going to have to maintain this probably for 5 to 6 months. If it falls apart in bad winter, deep winter, you may only have to maintain this for a few months. Because when it's cold, there's no heat, the die-off and the transmigration of people is going to be far quicker and far greater. So you have to be prepared. In my opinion, you should realistically count on at least a year. Because you want to go through a minimum of one cold cycle, which is going to reduce the population dramatically. And the next year, there isn't going to be as many people around, and you'll get more experience, and you may have to shrink your perimeter because you might be shrinking people too. And you may have to relocate also, depending on if you have water and stuff. But I'm just trying to show you a mindset where you're going to have to control the access of other people to where the defensive position you want to stay in. Okay? That's it, controlling it. You may not be able to stop organized groups that are well armed. And you have to know and be able to recognize that and pray, and you need to be praying too. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you the benefit of experience here, and you're going to have unique situations. So the bottom line here is, if you can have a few things, the very first one is water. If you can have water, shelter, because one of the things that's going to shock you is the amount of fires. I don't care if you live in a brick neighborhood or not, you're still going to be shocked by the amount of fires that happen within weeks of the cessation of local services. It is going to be a smoky, burning mess. For some reason, people that tend to wander around and live off of other people tend to destroy anything they can't have or carry off. It's just a crazy, evil mentality. So without services and without water available, your mains may go down and you may have local sources of stored water or a well or something, or you're catching rainwater. If you have water and shelter, you're going to do fairly well. And then if you do have food, you're generally not going to be able to transport it. So if you could just stay in one place and defend it for about a year, especially tight for through the first cold cycle, and you have these three things, in 1 year's time, you move from about a 5% chance of survival to about an 80% chance of survival. It is a force multiplier to be able to control the access. And one of the other reasons is not to control access just to keep them from taking your stuff. It's to keep disease from coming in. Because a lot of people do not recognize that one of the major things that you're going to face immediately is disease. Then you're going to have death from exposure. Will be a major one first for lack of heat. The population is going to rapidly decrease if there's a total cessation of community services. It is going to rapidly decrease. A lot of people have this mentality where they think, oh, we're just going to run out to the country and live off the farmers. Well, the farmers are really pretty well armed. They have large areas to defend, and there's going to be large groups of people out there. And generally, if you're going to have people that are moving from these settings into the rural settings, they are generally younger, stronger people. So you got to recognize the fact that roving gangs in a rural setting are generally a lot more equipped, smarter, and stronger than the people in the city gangs, the city groups that have gotten together. Because evil gets with evil, and they'll say, well, one of us can steal, but 8 of us can get together and really steal. You know, and it's that mentality. And they have coalitions among themselves, just like you're going to have coalitions among yourselves. So what I'm saying here is, if you're an older person and you can get a coalition going and you can control your local access and you have these basics, you have a good chance of lasting a year. And if you can last a year, and into the next planting cycle, you have a real good chance of making it. Because you, like she was saying, the lady, what's your name? Glenna. If you can start gardening, start putting those lawns under, and start gardening and start supplementing your supply stuff, you have a great chance of avoiding disease by avoiding control or contact with the outside people, and you have a chance of getting more quality people into your coalition. Because here's the thing, everybody basically wants security, and then after the fear and the shock of the downfall of society, people are going to start reorganizing on community bases. You've done it in a small area. This is going to grow. People are going to say, yeah, we want better security. So the area of security is going to grow. And you'll all say, well, I'll tell you what, instead of 12 of us taking shifts here, what we'll do is we'll provide 2 men a day to go out to a further point and extend the area of control of access. So that the first line of defense moves further away from you. And the further away from you that you can move your initial lines of defense, the better it is. Especially while there's firearms involved, because if you can see it, you can shoot it. You gotta remember that. If you can see them, you can shoot them. If they can see you, they can shoot you. It goes both ways. So if you can extend your primary line of defense, I'm talking about defensive strategies involving small arms. Okay, handheld small arms. The further away you can keep it, the safer it is, and also it gives you more reaction time. If something really bad is happening over here, it gives you more time to muster more defensive personnel to go to that area, or it gives you more time to prepare up close for a larger force coming in. So the further out you can get it, it's just common sense, but a lot of people just don't think like this because they haven't seen it happen. Common sense is that if you were just doing your castle, you mightn't even know there's a large force until it's already too close to where one firearm isn't going to be effective against the group that's there. You can see this, you can just picture what's going on here. So the more that you can have a community, the more a coalition you can build, the larger defensive ring you can project, the better off you're going to be. Now, we're going to talk about, I'm going to leave this up here, the H2O, because even if you have to relocate or evacuate, because there may be fires and there may be natural disasters, there may be something that you did not plan for. You still have to keep this in the forefront of your mind that you have to have water, you have to have shelter and food. You have to have these basic ingredients, and if you're relocating, you need to take them with you. You can't depend upon, you don't want to become the roving people that the other group down the street shooting. You want to say, hey, look, we're just passing through. Hey, we see your sign, we respect it. Where do we go to get around you? You know? And then you still got to keep an eye on them because they may want what you have. So, water's heavy. We were talking yesterday, 8.5 pounds. That's 8.467 pounds per gallon. You got to have, if you're moving and it's a hot summer day, you got to have some water. Or you got to have some portable devices to purify, because there's the two greatest limitations of putting a force in the field is one, how much water they have, and two, how much ammunition they have. That's from a military sense. I spent 7.5 years in a jungle over in Southeast Asia, and it was always water. The biggest problem was always water. The second problem was ammunition. You couldn't carry enough ammunition. So you had to use what you found, if you could find it, and use different weapons. And one of the major things about show of force is, I'm going to leave this up here. I'm going to write a word here. Adaptability. Adaptability. You may have all this planned for your neighborhood, and you may have a really good plan and stuff, but if things change because you didn't foresee something, you have to be pliable. You have to, in your mind, say, okay, I accept this. Don't sit around and get depressed and cry over it. You have to say, this is the new reality that I'm facing. You need to adapt. You need to think, what are the new threats? What are the new strengths? What are the new things that what are the new dangers I need to face? You need to constantly update and adapt and say, what resources do I have to meet this? You have to triage your environment and the threat level that you're facing against what do you have in these categories, and then back for force. What kind of force can you carry? That's why I'm saying that if you have to retreat, you have to translocate. You can't carry all those firearms that you had at your house. You can't carry all that ammunition. You've got to choose, and I'm telling you straight up, a .22 rifle and 500 rounds of ammunition you can carry with some water and food and a parka, a rain slicker, so you can get to somewhere else. If you have to move, you have to choose what's going on here. Now, in this mindset, we want to keep, I'm going to say this several times, a defensive perimeter. You have to decide where you're going to draw your line of force. Where is the boundary that you're going to say, behind me is secure, that which is in front of me is not? This was a function of area and resources. If you have a large area, you need more resources. If you don't have enough resources, such as men and force, ways of force, you need to go to a smaller area. Many times in the jungle, we were vastly outnumbered. We would be 8 and 10, 12, 20 people at the most, and we would be against thousands. It was nasty stuff. I remember one night in particular, we came up with this. We had 2 groups of 4. So what we did is we laid down in what's called a star. One man laid down here and he laid his legs out. Another man moved at 90 degrees and put one leg on top of his leg. The next guy faced a different direction and put his leg on top of this guy's leg, who was on top of that guy. So that if anybody was asleep and someone moved their leg, it would wake you up. And you were defending a 360-degree perimeter, was basically 10 feet across. And we would so that's about as small a perimeter as you can get in an open area, unless you have something big behind you, such as a cliff or something, to where you can get down here, defend a smaller area, and have a secure area behind you, so that you're defending this radius. But the trouble with this is that you're also trapped by that. If it's a good, secure thing, your point of egress or your escape route is into your zone of defense, which is their zone of offense. So you have to start thinking about this. If you're moving, or if you have a static position, you have to start thinking about, where is the area, how can I use what's naturally here, already in place, to my advantage? Is there a high spot? Can I put one man up here on top of this bluff to watch a greater area so that we can sleep and as we lay in defensive positions? See, what I'm trying to do is, I'm not trying to tell you specific things, I'm trying to tell you a strategy that you need to start adapting to use the natural advantages. And one of the things that you'll see, even from old cowboys and Indian movies, which Custer really blew it, is a way that's militarily sound, is to control the high ground. That you are in an elevated position in relationship to the force that you maybe think that you're trying to guard against. You can get up on a high point and see greater area than if you were on a flatland where you'd have to have people spread out to give you the warning. A lot of times having people spread out is not so much as a defensive force, but as a warning force. It's called patrols in military terms. They send patrols out to see what's out beyond them, to warn the group that's behind of where the incoming threat may be at, may be located beyond them. So on high ground, if you have any good visibility, you can see further, you can use less force. And one of the things that may be helpful to you is I want to talk about a term here as you're starting to see about what defensive strategies are. I want you to think about this term, force multiplier. This is an incredibly good way to think. How do I take that which I have and how do I make it more effective? To get you to understand what a force multiplier is that if you have one person and they're unarmed, you have very little force. But if you take that one person and you give them a handgun, they're suddenly able to project 40 or 50 feet of effective force. You have taken one person that really was ineffective and you've essentially made them into a 50-foot radius of protection just by one handgun. That is a force multiplier. That one handgun became a multiplication of the ability of that one person to project force. Now you give him a carbine or even just a .22 rifle and you have hundreds of yards of force multiplication from one person. The capabilities start going up. And the larger the caliber of the firearm, the greater the distance it can project force, the force multiplication becomes greater. Now you take this person on flat ground, this is flat ground, you take him up and you put him on a high defensive position, and his field of fire has just grown very wide. His force multiplication has went up because you're using him more effectively. And that's what you got to think about. Who shoots good? Who's got good eyes? Who can run up the hill? You know, how can I use the natural terrain to help me achieve force multiplication that is more efficient and effective use of the resources you have for the need you're facing? You got to think about this. What is going to make me more effective? What's going to make our night more effective? What's going to give us better security? What's going to give us more rest? What's going to allow us to transport more of what we're trying to transport to wherever it is we think we're going? This force multiplication really grows when you have, and I'll just tell you straight up, military experience shows that you need, when you're traveling and you have good, young, strong men that are trained and armed properly, it takes a minimum of 12 to provide minimal security. That means the level just to try and survive. This is a force not big enough to take on anything. This is a force just trying to move around. You'll see that most special forces have A teams of 6 to 8 people. Very rarely do they hit 12. Their goal is 12. And they have extensive training. They have extensive physical conditioning. They have the best of portable small arms. And you can see that they still need 6, 8, or 12 people. If you're going to have, so where you can have security at night where 1 or 2 guys could stay awake and guard the other so they're asleep, and you can have enough to spread out, that's where you could get your defensive layer. Moving around, this is 12 capable armed people. So if you're going to move a group, if you're going to move a group, believe me, if you wish to move, you need to have a coalition and you need to move a bunch of people at once. Your best chance is to get most of your armed people out ahead and to the sides and behind, and keep the group in the middle, and have your force a movable zone of defense by these small armed groups on the outside of the moving mass, so that your ability to project force is not reduced in any direction, and they need to move simultaneously, which sometimes may not be possible because you may come past where there's a piece of high ground over here. So you may send one small group up here to provide a big circle of defense so that the large group can move through quickly. And if there's something happening, this could be a good place for the big group to resort to fall back to. So what I'm trying to tell you, if you're going to move, you should move early in the dissolution of community services. Move early. I mean, within hours. If you're going to effectively move, you need to do it that quickly. After 1 day to 2 days, people are going to find out several things. One, they're going to find out that the average city in America has less than a 3-day supply of food in the stores. That's how much just-in-time communication has reduced the ability of communities to be prepared. 2, this will shock you. And this has been proven time and time again. Within 12 days to 14 days, the average road segment in America that's transportable, that you could drive over, is reduced to an average of 12 miles. That means without maintenance, constant maintenance, an average road where you could drive is impassable every 12 miles or sooner. In an urban setting, it is far quicker than that. Trees fall down, fires happen, cars get burnt in the road, whatever happens. People put up roadblocks, bridges fall down, floods wash stuff away. So if you're going to move, and you're going to move any distance at all, you move immediately. Because within 2 weeks, it's going to be even tough to walk. You come to a river, you'll be very glad if there's a bridge there or not. You'll find out what the pioneers, how much tougher they really were than we are today. So what I'm trying to say is, on force multiplication, you've got to make a choice. Are you going to stay or are you going to go? So, defensive perimeters, we keep them out. We have coalitions of people. We try to use high ground as a force multiplier. In defensive mentality, if you have the resources, you need to have, I was hoping I'd have time to get to this, and I think we do, tiered defenses. Tiered defenses. You can equate this to the example of the old castles. You had a castle, and it had a moat around it. The moat is a tier, it is an outer ring of defense. Inside of this, you had access. You had a drawbridge that came up. Your second line of defense was the walls of the castle. It's another line, it's another tier. And they had high spots. Then inside of that, they had towers. And these towers were able to be locked off from the inner courtyard so that fighters could stay up in here and shoot down upon invaders inside of it. So they have multiple levels of defense. From these high towers, they could project force. They used high ground, they used defensive perimeters, they used natural attributes in the nature around them, which they generally built these on high places, so that the amount of force that could be directed against them would be only through a narrow way, like a small road or a small incline that was less steep gradient. So that where it was really surrounded by cliffs. On the flatter lands, they did this with the moats, with all the natural things they could put in. This is called a static defense, the moat. You need to use this. You need to think about using your abilities of what nature's given you to help be a defensive part of your strategy. You need to try and think about tiered defenses. In a neighborhood, with your blocks, you will have rings of defense, like we were showing. Instead of having people on the corners, you're going to have some out here further. These people will be carrying long rifles. These people on the corners will be carrying long rifles. The reason why is because they want to be able to project force at a greater distance than what you're going to need, that if you have to fall back in and you're going to defend these houses, you're going to pull the people back into the houses and they're going to be shooting out the windows or laying in between the houses. You're talking smaller range because generally you have more blocks up here and you can't see that far. So your field of fire is greatly reduced from these great big dimensions to these smaller dimensions, smaller and smaller calibers, smaller and smaller concentrations of field of fire. You could have people back here, you could have children and women back here guarding windows. You know, you don't want them out here, you want your more experienced people with long rifles out here, and you have a tier 1 right here, you have a tier 2, you have a tier 3, and then you have fallback positions that if you start losing, you have what's a home base, and everything gets drawn back into the final place. This is where you're going to make your final stand. And what this is that you have this agreed upon in advance. Generally, you want a masonry building. You want it to be a tall building. You don't want it to be burnable. You want it to have a good field of fire. In fact, you may have to prepare this position by burning down several houses around you so that the enemy cannot use them as a defensive mechanism against you. So that you burn these houses down around your final position so that you can have a greater field of fire to project force out of, to keep them further out. The further you keep them away, it's always better. You get up in your face, you have to have specially trained people if you're going to fight hand to hand. You have to be prepared for that. We haven't talked about knives. You need some good knives. You need some boot knives, you need some pocket knives. You need some pepper spray. Bear pepper spray, that's one thing I didn't go over. You go down to the sporting goods stores and buy pepper spray that's for bears. Great big canister, looks like a fire extinguisher. When they get up close to you or you're out here on your food line serving people and it starts getting out of control and you don't want to shoot them, you mace the heck out of them and then you fall back. The reason they call it pepper spray for bears is because the acid content of it is a little too high for personal defense against people. You know, it will burn you, But we call it bear condiment so that they get a little taste of the good stuff before they eat it. So you need to think about that. It's a non-lethal thing. You think about tiered defense. How many tiers or rings of defense can I put out there to keep that threat away? And the more prepared you are on any of these things by thinking in advance, you have force multiplied your resources and your ability to withstand outside force being projected against you. One of the strategies, this is the simple strategies. These are incredibly basic things. You can go ahead and if you have time, you can do this. There's real good terms for this, but I'm going to simplify it for you. I'm not going to use the military terms. You can put in what they're calling static defensive measures. That means out at your outer ring of defense or even further away, you put in devices that will keep vehicles away. You can put in devices that will explode remotely that either you control or they tripwire. And so one of the things that you might think about investing in is some monofilament fishing line, leader line, L-E-A-D-E-R line, monofilament, 2, 4, 6, and 8 pounds. Thank you. So one of the things you use that for is for tripwires. You can not only use it for booby traps, you can put this monofilament fishing line 6 or 8 inches off the ground, way outside your perimeter, with tin cans on it with rocks in it, so when they trip on it, it makes noise. So that you've extended your zone of warning that something's going on out there. Like you have 3 or 4 tiers of defense. Beyond your last guy, you got trip lines. You can buy flares that are trip line activated legally as a civilian. Put out some flares, and when those puppies go off, they know they've stumbled into somebody that's prepared. They don't know what it is yet, but they're going, wow, if they have this, they got other stuff even better than this. They're going to back up, they're going to go somewhere else. Only a trained, dedicated, tightly commanded, that means disciplined force, would dare come against a multi-tiered defensive position. And we're talking military level training. There's lots of people out there with military level training. There's very few of them that have urban experience. A lot of our Iraqi veterans are starting to get urban experience. You ask them where they want to fight, and the last place they'll say is in a town. They want to fight out in the open field, they want to fight in the forest, they want to fight in the desert. They'd rather even be in the jungle than in a town. The urban setting is incredibly difficult because of the amount of cover that's available, because you can't have enough force to clear all the buildings. It's just stuff can pop up from any angle around you and start biting on you. And they'll say they will regret, and their heaviest casualties have always been, like at Kirkuk and at, what was that town started with an M? Up north of Baghdad, they had, the Marines had all those casualties. Mosul?
Mosul?
Yeah, I think you're right. But anyway, the bottom line is that there's simple things you can do to get your defensive line out and away from you. And then you need to show force. And I'm saying that signs are very effective in an urban setting. I really, if you got a nice looking sign, someone's got a stencil kit or a sign making kit, and you make a real nice professional looking sign and you put it up there and you say, 100 yards ahead, you'll be entering the Brentwood Coalition defensive zone. They're gonna look at that and go, oh, dang, let's go over to this neighborhood instead. Signs, you have a deadline. You have a sign that warns them that they're coming up, but then you have what's called a deadline. And that's your first perimeter of defense where you're going to choose to use deadly force. And you put it out there. You say, you cross this point, you will be shot. Deadly force will be used against you. You have a deadline, and you enforce that deadline. And if you have to keep falling back, make them pay. Make them pay all the way, because generally after they've suffered 3 or 4 casualties, they're going to give up because they're not ran into this problem. They're used to going in and scaring people that are unarmed and taking whatever they have and being the big dogs on the block. They are not used to organization. Organization scares them. Organization shows force. They perceive force. You can do a lot psychologically with signs. You can do a lot psychologically with booby traps. You know that large 50 caliber Barrett that we had here that was $12,500? If you're in an open setting and you can knock their vehicle out at over a mile and a half away, it warps their minds. Oh my God, if they're doing that this far away, think what they're going to do when we get closer. You know, and if you can do this is a step that really is psychologically too, is that if you can somehow pull together a uniform, if you can dress in the same colors so that you know who you are, it helps you, and it looks to them like, oh my God, this is a trained outfit, they got a uniform. You see what I'm saying? This is some National Guard unit we're running into, you know, this is some weird thing, we're getting the heck out of here. The uniform, psychologically devastating, and it is a multiplier of force. Just visually, they perceive that you are someone greater than who you may think you are. If you have any amount of organization and you can do any of these simple things, control your access, get you some tiers of defense out, protect your water, have your shelter and your food, and have enough people so that people can rotate so that you can maintain an effective level of deterrence and observation at your perimeters, this will work. This will work. It seems like a lot, but it really isn't. But it does take cooperation. You do need to get with your neighbors. You need to talk about it. One thing that I really, really appreciate in doing a security assessment for a neighborhood is the fact that they have a neighborhood watch already in place. The police will come in and teach you how to observe stuff, teach you where to observe from, teach you how to communicate. It gives you a cohesiveness to build upon. If you don't have a neighborhood watch in your area, ask for it. Use their resources to help you organize your neighborhood. And just say, hey, what about if things go bad? After you get the neighborhood watch going, go, hey, what if things go bad? What are you going to do? I'd sure like to be able to help you. You know, I'm willing to help you. If you put that out first, they'll say, well, they can't say, well, I'm going to touch you, buddy. You know, and then, you know, you start saying, hey, I want to help you. They're going to be drawn in. They're going to want to help you. And if you start putting the seeds in their mind about what they're going to do and what they're going to face, I think that you could pull it together. And you could say, Lord, lead me to the people. Pray about it. Do all these things. But this is simple, common sense stuff. Is there anything here that you can't see in your mind now? Because we could spend weeks filling this in and making this really tight, making this super effective. Yes, ma'am?
How long does the bear pepper spray last?
Okay, here's the question: is how long does the bear pepper spray last? It lasts for a long time. Even with substantial washing, it's very difficult to get off. Very difficult to get off. You do not want to do it in an enclosed area. Outside, you don't want to do it in a car. You don't want to do it in your house because you're going to have to move. Okay, so now what I want to do now is if you could figure out that you guys could do something like this. Pull together some black clothes, you know, yellow armbands, you know, same hat, something. Wear some boots. If you want to have some extremely effective things, I can't tell you some of them on camera, but you can get online and you can do some internet research about the anarchist cookbook. You can do some things like hit defensive strategies. You can go to a military surplus store and buy a manual of booby traps and incendiary devices. It's going to cost you $5. The anarchist cookbook's going to cost you 19 or 20. Resources that'll give you fabulous ideas of force multipliers. Okay, so now we're controlling local access, show of force, adaptability, and you really want to keep this adaptability in mind, that do the best with whatever you have. Okay. This is the moral quandary. Okay. Say you don't kill him. What are you going to do with him? You can't call the ambulance. And they're going to suck up your resources big time. This is why most military firearms issued today are issued in small calibers, so that they do not kill, they wound. Because it takes 5 persons out of the battle to take one wounded person out. And then it just keeps sucking resources out of the field, out of the fort that you have in the field, to care for that wounded person. That's why you see 9mm sidearms. That's why you see wimpy little 223 rifles. They want to wound and use up the resources of the opponent to care for their wounded. A roving gang, if the person's not a top level person, they're probably not going to care for their own wounded. They're going to realize it's a liability. They're not going to carry them. They know they're dead. They can't help them. They're going to get infected. They're going to die. So what are you going to do in response to them? You need to pray about that. Because if the Lord says no, you better not go out and expose yourself to retrieve them or help them. If the Lord says yes, you better run out there with a defensive perimeter ahead of you and then retrieve them and care for them. You got to figure out what is going to happen here. These are things that people don't think about. So, if this is a big thing, you need to start thinking about this, because you cannot have an answer in advance that fits all situations, okay? You just can't have it, because it's going to be so wild and wacky. You're going to say, Lord, and this is the best thing that I've ever found for all these situations. And if you want to write this down, this will serve you well. If you would write this down and pray about this, is that if you need to know what to do, turn to the Lord and say, Lord, what is a unique strategy you would have for me in this particular situation today? And then don't rely on the answer that He gives you today to be sufficient for what's coming against you tomorrow. You've got to keep turning back and saying, Lord, what is a unique strategy you would have for me in this particular situation today? That doesn't mean that you have to know the answer to everything in advance. You know He's going to help you. You're asking for help. He's going to give you something effective. But this is predicated upon your ability to hear the Lord. So if you can't hear the Lord, you better invest in that more than anything else. Okay, we're out of time. And if you would pay attention to this will help you not only in the days to come, this will help you in everyday challenges.